This is Jonathan Wood from Soft Circuits, and in this video I'd like to talk about creating your own custom exception classes. And to demonstrate that, we'll create a project, and we'll make it an MFC application, and we'll call it Custom Exceptions. And for simplicity, I'm going to make it a dialogue-based application. And here's our dialogue, and we'll need to run a little code, so we'll just create a little button to run that. And let's add an event handler. Okay, so now we've got a little routine that's going to be called when we click our Go button. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a try-catch block. And we'll catch a CException object, or a pointer to one. Now, CException is the base class that MFC uses for exceptions, and some of the functions it provides is there's a report error method, which will display a message box, and we can also delete, and we should delete the exception when we're through with it. And here's some of the exceptions that MFC defines. We can see we have one for memory and file exceptions. So we have a number of different types of exceptions that are already created for us, and we can make use of those. So then, to demonstrate that, let's call AFX throw memory exception. And let's run this project. And we'll click our Go button, and we'll see that that call to the report error method is displaying a message associated with the memory exception object, and that message is simply that we're out of memory. So that's pretty simple there. So we've just showed you a number of different types of exception classes that MFC provides, and those will cover you in most cases. However, there are some cases where you may need some custom error handling or some custom exceptions, and so that's what we're going to talk about. Let's remove this call to AFX throw memory exception, and let's say we're doing some processing here, and some condition is found that is an error condition, and we're just going to put true there in the if block. But let's assume there's some test, and we've encountered some sort of error. Now, one thing we can do is we can simply display an error ourselves. So we can just say AFX message box, and we're just simply reporting that some error has occurred. The problem is, what do we do now? If we just leave it like that and run that, that's not too bad. However, we are still going to execute the rest of the try block because we haven't thrown an exception. We're still going to continue executing any code that comes after, which could be a problem. Now, one thing we can do is we can call AFX throw user exception, and that will throw an exception. But there's some problems with that too, so let's run that. And we'll click our go, and here we get our user exception message. But now we also get the another error message, and that's associated with the one that's displayed in our catch block. So one thing we can do here is we can add another catch block. Now, since user exception is derived from C exception, our catch block that catches C exception will handle that error as well. However, we can create a separate catch block that catches user exception objects, and this way, if that comes before the more general catch block, that will handle those user exceptions. And in this case, we don't want to display an error message, although we still need to delete it. So we'll try that. Hit go. There's our custom error message. And when we dismiss that, no further processing in that block occurs. So that works pretty good. And for a lot of cases, just when you need a custom error situation, isolated cases, that'll probably work for you. Now, what if we have a class in our application that has a number of potential custom exceptions, and instead of doing this every time, we'd like a little more formal support for the types of errors that can occur in our particular class. We also might like the option of handling errors in that associated with that in the same catch block, so we only need the one catch block for handling all errors. In these cases, what we want to do is create a custom exception class, and by deriving it from the C exception class, we will integrate with what MFC is already doing for exception handling. So let's add a new class, and we'll call it C widget exception. And again, we're going to derive it from the regular C exception class. And there's our class. And what we want to do, first of all, let's say that our particular widget will have a code associated with it, and that'll be useful for troubleshooting problems with our widget. So we need to kind of add that custom functionality. So we'll add a code to our, or rather an argument to our constructor, and I'll do that in the implementation as well. And we'll store that in a member variable. And then the other thing we need to do now, when we in the case where we just have a single catch block and we're just catching the base class, the C exception class, and we call report error, we need to override that behavior so that our widget exception will display its own custom message. So in fact, report error is a virtual method, so we can simply override that. However, there is another method of the C exception class called getErrorMessage, and that allows applications to call that method and get the error message string. And in fact, the report error method also calls getErrorMessage. So what we really want to do is override getErrorMessage, and then that will change the behavior of both methods. Okay, so the getErrorMessage method looks like this. It takes an argument with a pointer to a buffer to hold the message, the number, the size of the buffer, and then there's also an optional help context that we can set. We won't worry about that in our example here. So let's implement that method. And there's actually two versions of this method, and we want the constant version since we're not modifying the class. And so we can just create a string. And we'll incorporate into our message the code that we provide in the constructor. And we then need to copy that over. So we'll use the latest and safest string routines. And we'll indicate success. Okay, so let's go back to our test code, and instead of this, let's say we've encountered an error with a particular widget class in our application, and so we're going to throw an exception, and the way we'll do that is by using the throw keyword. And we're going to need to include the header file. And IntelliSense hasn't caught up with us yet, but let's give it a code, and then we can get rid of the other stuff. Now, the last thing I want to show you when we're doing this is we now have an option of how we handle that. We can add blocks, two separate catch blocks, one for the widget exceptions, and in this case we're going to report the error if it's a widget exception. So let's go ahead and run that now. I have to include the const in the implementation. Let's try that. So I click go. I'm now getting the error message from my widget exception class along with my custom widget specific error code of 75, and if I click OK, no further processing is done in that block. Now in this case we're doing the exact same thing in the widget exception catch block as we are in the regular exception catch block, and since our widget exception is derived from cException, this extra block is unnecessary. Now you may want to have an extra block in some cases where you want some special custom error handling associated with your widget. For example, maybe you want to show a more detailed dialog box that will allow the user to better isolate what's going wrong. But if all you're going to do is display the error message, we can now default to our regular cException base class, and we'll test that. We run go. We're now getting that same error message because the generic cException catch handler is calling our getMessage error message method, and we're still breaking out of that block. So you won't find the need for this a lot, but it can be a useful thing, especially if you're going to have a more formal design in your application with some complex objects. They're going to have their own exceptions and your own custom way of dealing with them.